Hi, I'm Dr. Margaret Paul, and I'd like to talk to you about the ultimate way of healing anxiety. Some of anxiety is physical. For example, if your blood sugar is low at night, the adrenaline kicks in to bring the sugar into the brain, and that can cause you to wake up with anxiety. But today I want to talk about the emotional causes of anxiety. Most of anxiety comes when we don't feel safe. And many of us were brought up with a lot of false beliefs about what actually creates a sense of safety. And the main false belief that we have is that we can create safety with a lot of our addictions to worry, our addictions to ruminating and obsessing about things, our addictions to trying to control other people, to getting angry, to giving ourselves up and going along. These are all ways that the wounded part of ourselves tries to create a sense of safety. But all that does is make us feel anxious. While it may have created some sense of safety as we were growing up, today all that does is create anxiety, because all of those behaviors are various forms of self-abandonment. If you have an actual child and you're ignoring that child, not attending to that child's needs, not speaking up for that child, making that child feel safe around other people, that child is likely to feel very anxious. And that's what happens on the inner level. We can think of our feelings inside like an inner child. And when we're not taking responsibility for those feelings, when we're ignoring our feelings, when we're not listening to our feelings, then we can feel very anxious. Our feelings are a form of inner guidance. They are always letting us know whether we're taking loving care of ourselves or whether we're abandoning ourselves. And so when you're feeling anxious, most of the time, it's because there's some form of self-abandonment going on. There's some way that you're not attending to yourself, some way that you're not taking loving care of yourself. So, for example, if you're telling yourself things like you're a jerk or you're a failure or you'll never amount to anything, of course you're going to feel anxious. If you said these things to a child, the child would feel anxious. The child would feel abandoned and alone and anxious. And so self-judgment is one of the ways that we create a lot of anxiety with ourselves. Very often when I'm teaching a workshop, I ask people to come on up and work with me. And then I ask them, how are you feeling right now? And invariably they say, oh, I'm feeling anxious. And so I tell them to go inside and notice what they're saying to themselves that's creating the anxiety. And invariably they're saying something like, oh, I'm going to make a fool of myself, or I'm not going to know what to do, or everybody's going to judge me, or nobody's going to like me. Now, these are the kinds of things that the wounded part of ourselves, our ego-wounded self, says to us. And when we say these kinds of things, we feel anxious. And the anxiety is letting us know that we're abandoning ourselves, in this case with some form of self-judgment. Now there's many forms of anxiety that can create, there's many forms of self-abandonment that can create anxiety. For example, if you're not attending to your feelings, but you're blaming somebody else, or you're making somebody else responsible, or you're giving yourself up to somebody else, that is going to create anxiety, because you're telling yourself, I'm not going to take care of you. I'm not going to take responsibility for you. I'm going to make somebody else responsible. Now, if you had an actual child and you were doing that with that child, that would create a lot of anxiety. And it does the very same thing on the inner level. Now, how do we heal this? Well, the inner bonding process, a 6-step, very, very powerful process, is the ultimate way to heal anxiety. Because what happens with the inner bonding process is you learn to tune into your feelings, you learn to be present, you learn to know when you're feeling anxious, and you learn to recognize how you're treating yourself, what you're telling yourself that's causing the anxiety. And then you learn to turn to a higher source of love and wisdom that lets you know what would actually be loving to you, This is a practice, and it's not that hard to learn to access your personal source of spiritual guidance that will enable you to learn what is loving to yourself. So how do you learn the inner bonding process? I encourage you to go to innerbonding.com, download our free course, join our membership community, which is an incredibly wonderful, compassionate community of intentional learners who help each other to learn and practice the inner bonding process and heal their anxiety. I look forward to seeing you online.